Opposition front bench, Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by very much welcoming the debate? As the members for Harwich and North Essex and North Wiltshire said, we used to have more of these debates, but I think it's very good that we've had one in government time. And whilst the member for North East, for New Forest East, said we were down to the usual suspects, I still think it's been a very high quality debate, with excellent speeches on the Labour side from my honourable friends, the member for Halton, Worley, North Durham, and on the government side from the members for Horsham, Rayleigh and Whitford, Harwich and North Essex, New Forest East, North Wiltshire, Filton and Bradley Stoke, Bracknell and the Isle of Wight, and from other opposition parties, the member for Strangford and Tiverton and Honiton, and it's been a really excellent debate. Now, the first duty of any government is to keep the nation safe and protect our citizens. From deployments abroad in response to the invasion of Ukraine and deployments at home during the COVID-19 pandemic, our armed forces are essential to our national defence, our national resilience, and meeting our national NATO obligations. Labour is deeply proud of our armed forces personnel, veterans and their families, and for the contribution that they make to our country. Theirs is the ultimate public service, and their professionalism and bravery is rightly respected across the world. We thank them. Labour's committed to strengthening our national defences and supporting our armed forces. Strong national defence is a secure foundation upon which Labour's mission-driven government will be built if we're fortunate enough to win the general election when it comes. Labour's commitment to NATO is unshakable. With a party of NATO, and Labour values of democracy, freedom and peace are embedded in its founding treaty. Article 5 is the cornerstone of Labour's commitment to Britain's security. Labour's support for nuclear deterrence is total. We will upgrade the UK's deterrent and build the new submarines needed at Barrow. And we believe that defence procurement can strengthen UK sovereignty, security and economic growth. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the 2.5% commitment of GDP, so I want to make it clear that Labour is totally committed to 2.5%. In fact, the last time defence spending was at 2.5%, it was under a Labour government in 2010. The current Conservative government have cut defence spending. It's never been 2.5% in any of the last 14 years of Tory government, and we've seen the army cut to its smallest size since Napoleon. Now, my honourable friends for Worley, Halton and North Durham made these points very well in their contributions. Labour will always do what's needed to defend Britain, and we will always spend what's necessary to deal with the threats that we face. That's why we're committed to getting back to 2.5% as soon as we can in a responsible way. We'll set out a credible plan to do so if we win the general election. It's why we'll hold a strategic defence and security review if we do get into government, to look properly at the threats we face and what we're already spending. And it's simply not credible, Mr Deputy Speaker, to claim, as the government does, that it can be done by firing 72,000 civil servants, as the Secretary of State set out. And the last time this government promised to make their defence plans add up by firing MOD civil servants in 2015, the number of civil servants in the MOD increased. So it's hardly credible now that they can claim that that will do the job. Now, my right honourable friend in his opening remarks said that people will judge governments on what they do, not what they say, and that's absolutely right. My honourable friend for North Durham said that the government's promises were smoke and mirrors and sound bites for the next general election. It's quite hard to see it as anything else when it's been left so late in this Parliament to be announced. The Institute for Government have said the government's plan does not add up and is not credible. They say that cutting 70,000 civil servants' jobs will get nowhere near close to delivering the savings needed, and that even when using R&D budgets as well, it will leave questions about how the rest will be paid for. So it's welcome when the House heard from the honourable gentleman for Rayleigh and Whitford saying that the Defence Select Committee, and the chair is also in his place, will be scrutinising the £75 billion figure. I look forward to seeing what they have to say when they have done so. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the truth is the Conservatives have failed on defence over the last 14 years. They've cut spending, and they're still doing so. They've hollowed out our armed forces. Since 2010, the Conservatives have reduced our armed forces by over 43,000 personnel. 1 in 5 ships have been removed from the Royal Navy, and more than 200 aircraft have been taken out of service in the last 5 years alone. They've cut the British Army to its smallest size since Napoleon, with threats increasing, and while NATO is boosting its high readiness forces from 40,000 to 300,000, and ministers plan to cut the army further. These are the facts. Recruitment targets have been missed every year, so the government haven't even been able to recruit the numbers they want, and rotation rates are dropping. My honourable friend, the member for Halton, referred in his remarks to the outflow and the state of reserve forces in respect of some research that he's been doing into the numbers. So the last 14 years have corroded the nation's contract with those who serve, and we've got to do better. They've left personnel living in damp and mouldy housing, and perhaps not surprisingly, morale has fallen as has retention. And is it any wonder when we leave people living in conditions like some of our forces' accommodation? Nearly half of all serving personnel live in the lowest grade single living accommodation, and over 4,000 personnel live in accommodation so poor the MOD is forced to reduce or scrap collecting rent altogether. And 21,000 maintenance appointments were missed by contractors hired by ministers between April 2022 and February 2024. So the Independent Kerslake Commission on Armed Forces Housing, entitled Homes Unfit for Heroes, has called the state of forces housing a tax on the goodwill of service personnel and their families. During the cost of living crisis, the numbers of personnel and veterans on universal credit are rising, and some troops are even using food banks to get by. So in government, Labour will renew the country's commitment to those who serve, set new standards for service accommodation, and legislate for an Armed Forces Commissioner to act as a strong independent champion for our forces and their families to improve service life. We will fully incorporate the Armed Forces Covenant into law, fulfilling the moral contract our society makes with those who serve. And I noticed that the honourable gentleman who speaks for the SNP, the member for West Dunbartonshire, said he wanted a representative body, but was willing to support some of Labour's proposed policies. On procurement, the Conservatives have wasted over £15 billion of taxpayers' money through mismanagement of defence procurement programmes, with over £5 billion wasted since 2019 alone. 46 out of 52 major projects are not on time or not on budget. Look at Ajax, which was supposed to be in service in 2017. With £4 billion spent so far, there are no deployed vehicles, and it won't be in service until the next decade. No wonder the Secretary of State isn't listening and is too busy chatting to the honourable member. Doesn't want to hear about the failures of defence procurement on his watch, or the government's cost-saving cuts to E7 Wedgetail, cutting a number of planes from 5 to 3, with taxpayers footing 90% of the original cost to get only 60% of the planned capability. And Mr Deputy Speaker, yes, of course I will.
I'm very critical of Wedgetail, but just as a fact, on Ajax, the initial operating capability for the first vehicles is in the back end of 2025, next year, not in the next decade.
I accept the fact, if I said the next decade, that was not what I meant to say. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Public Accounts Committee has described the defence procurement system as broken and repeatedly wasting taxpayers' money. My honourable friend, the member for Worley, was right when he said we need an industrial base and that short-term cost-cutting won't do. He said we needed to speed up procurement, especially of administration, when it comes to making these decisions. And the honourable gentleman for Rayleigh and Wickford said that we need a change of culture as well as reforming procurement, as did the honourable member for Harwich and North Essex, who set out some ideas that he has about how best to change culture in organisations that are can be quite resistant to change. And I accept that that is going to be a a difficult job, but I think there's an acceptance across the House that it does need to be done. But at the moment, it's fair to say the government have been wasting taxpayers' money hand over fist. And it's not just waste in procurement. Parliamentary answers show that the Department has lost £927 million to fraud since 2010, 619 million of it since 2019. That will be enough to pay for 170 Challenger 3 tanks. Yet the average length of time for fraud defence to conduct an investigation has increased from 519 days in 2019 to 742 days in 2023. Why? The government seems to have stopped focusing on good administration. A Labour government will do better. Under a future Labour government, will drive deep defence procurement reform inside the MOD to reduce waste, make sure armed forces have the kit they need to defend Britain. Mr Speaker, Labour is committed to strengthening our national defence and supporting our armed forces and their families. We'll always do what's necessary to defend the country, and we'll always spend what's necessary to deal with the threats we face. Britain will be better defended under Labour. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister, Dr. Andrew.